Video by Emmanuel Isaiah Smith.
Hello, good evening. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Friday, January 23rd, 2025. The time is 5:40 p.m., and I am in Miami Beach, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is Eugenics and Gangstalking, Population Fantasies. And I'll have you know, ladies and gentlemen, that I tend to do these lectures outdoors, so I may have to raise or project my voice from time to time in order to drown out the background noise. So please adjust your volumes accordingly. Ladies and gentlemen, this lecture will be done in a similar format to my NKVD lecture and my COINTELPRO Operation Hoodwink lecture, in which I've gathered a number of documents that have stood out to me as being particularly relevant to clandestine gang stalking in the realm of today's topic. So I'll read from these documents, and the talking points that are particularly relevant to clandestine gang stalking, I will examine, analyze, and expound upon as such. The book that I will be reading from today is a book that was written by Major Leonard Darwin, the son of the renowned scientist Charles Darwin, the man that put forward certain biological theories concerning evolution and survival of the fittest with respect to the capacity for certain animals, Homo sapiens included, their ability to progress through the ages without going extinct, as opposed to certain other animals that lacked the physiological qualities to evolve and progress and survive through the ages. So, ladies and gentlemen, this lecture, these notes that I have, or rather these pages from this book called What is Eugenics, which was written in 1928, are not in sequential order. I will read from these documents as I have them saved on my tablet. Thank you for tuning in. Also, ladies and gentlemen, you can look at my previous lecture on the ideal population, which I did months ago, and you will see similarities in the theme to today's lecture on eugenics and gang stalking. If you would like a separate reference for how eugenics and by proxy population control contribute to the auspices and operations of clandestine gang stalking. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin here with page 31, and the first paragraph reads, "To ask a man not to marry or if he does marry, to have no children is to ask a great deal. But self-sacrifice is the very foundation of our ideas of what is noble in human conduct. If the world of the future would be benefited by a man refraining from parenthood, surely it must be right for him so to refrain. We should all do what we can to help to ascertain when such conduct would be right, and when right, to encourage those called on to make such sacrifices to follow the dictates of their consciences. Those who think that little good could be done by such persuasion should nevertheless do all they can in this direction. It can, however, hardly be doubted that if these ideas as to our duties were to become part of our everyday religious thought, the conduct of many persons would thus be affected. The first question to be answered is, who should volunteer to refrain from parenthood? In some cases, there is no doubt. For example, no one should have a child who is suffering from one of those rare diseases or deformities, including some kinds of blindness or deafness, which cause great suffering when they appear, and which are apt to reappear in the same family for many generations. So what we see here, ladies and gentlemen, is a very bold assertion by Major Darwin. What he's saying here is that the state, and when I say the state, I'm referring to the country that one resides in, should be able to dictate, based on your genetic qualities, who should marry and who should be able to have children, with persons of superior stock or superior genetic qualities being able to marry and have offspring in the interest of society, and those who have inferior genetic qualities or traits to be legally restricted from being able to give birth and even marry. What this is implying here is that the furtherance of what he refers to in various points in this book as the breed or the race, meaning the human race, these matters should be state regulated, and that the very right to marry and have offspring affect the future of the human race directly, and that only the best with respect to their personal appearance, their genetic qualities, their energy, their ability to contribute to society, their ability to work, their ability to carry on a marriage, their ability to rear children, in the same capacity that their parents raised them in, should have precedence over the inalienable right to marry or have children. Furthermore, Major Darwin is asserting that there are people in various societies, and mind you, Major Darwin is an Englishman, so he's speaking as an Englishman from an Englishman's perspective, being a resident and a citizen of the United Kingdom, you see. So when I apply these concepts to the global community, you'll see why later in the lecture. But this man, Major Darwin, who like his father is a brilliant man, is speaking from the context of a man who lives in England and who is speaking from the perspective of how to make the citizenry or the population of England as close to perfect as it can possibly become. However, you'll see later in the lecture, ladies and gentlemen, where this concept of the perfect population extends beyond Europe. It extends beyond Africa. It extends beyond Asia. It extends beyond Australia. It extends beyond any one country, and can eventually and invariably become a cabal, a genetic cabal of state-sanctioned methods and protocols of bringing about the best population worldwide, you see. So Major Darwin is asserting here also that there are certain persons that should voluntarily refrain from marriage and parenthood in the interest of the betterment of the race. Okay? Seeing as how some persons are born with genetic defects and deformities, seeing that they don't reproduce will guarantee that no one else will be born in his lineage with those same deformities in the interest of the greater good. So in other words, if you yourself have defects or deformities, Major Darwin's argument is that you should be legally restricted from giving birth so that these deformities are not passed down to someone else who may or may not be able to contribute to society with these deformities. Now, look at this from a perspective that introduces clandestine gang stalking and its auspices into the mix. Okay? Gang stalking at its root is about selecting superior people, okay? And mind you, I'm going to draw this from a perspective of an American, someone who has lived in America my whole entire life, and someone who can only bring these matters to your attention from the perspective of an American. So with respect to clandestine gang stalking, which I can't say for sure exists in other countries because I've not experienced it in other countries or really visited any other countries at any length, aside from Canada, but that was about 30 years ago now. So from the perspective of an American, gang stalking seeks to select what you might refer to as preferable Americans. Now, gang stalkers, liaisons, undercover operatives, all the persons that a targeted person has to interact with, or rather is forced to interact with through synchronization, okay, are not the architects of gang stalking. They're the primary actors of gang stalking. The architects of gang stalking are hidden and clandestine. They don't make themselves known, although in past lectures and in future lectures, I will point their activity out more and more. But the architects of gang stalking have this fantasy of being able to artificially engineer the perfect population for this country based on traits and qualities that they see as preferable. And persons like myself, who have been deemed by this cabal of hostile agitators to have exhibited disruptive qualities, probably from my teenage years onward, needed to serve as guinea pigs for this operation so that, quote, superior Americans to myself will have the opportunity to practice these disruption mechanisms on somebody who is inferior with respect to my personal traits and qualities. So when you talk about superiority here in the United States with respect to eugenics and genetic traits, stalkers don't really get too much into the science of who they tap as gang stalkers. If you work, if you look decent, if you have a good medical health record, or rather a clean bill of health, you're married or about to be, and you have some blueprint for what you want to do with your life occupationally and so forth, you will be considered a preferable American citizen. Because chances are you'll get married, you'll raise responsible children, and you'll pay taxes. That's really all those really the only qualities here in the United States that qualify you as a preferable American. That's it. Marriage, child rearing, taxes. That's it. You don't have to be religious. You don't have to be charitable. And if your parents were like that, married, responsible, taxpayers, you're considered to be of a person from good stock. They don't know what kind of genetic diseases you might have or what kind of genetic deformities you might have, or later in life, maybe you get a genetic mutation that causes some sort of a health catastrophe in your life. Stalkers don't know that. If you look healthy, if you seem energetic, if you work, if you're in a relationship, if you raise children, if you pay taxes, then you're superior. That's their only criteria. They may do other little street theater tests to see how you react to other Americans in certain situations to determine what character traits you may have. But ultimately, gang stalking, it has a very unscientific way of determining who's superior and who's not. They just simply go off your daily actions. They don't do any in-depth genetic studies. So if you're considered a preferable American, these stalkers, these liaisons, these undercover operatives, these signalers, the architects of gang stalking could tap you, or rather somehow initiate you into this state-sanctioned cabal of pesterers and signal you to a person who's less preferable, like me, your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, so that you can use your domination or pestering tactics, your disruption tactics on me as practice for other assignments that you may be sent on by this clandestine cabal of stalkers. Okay, we're gonna go to the next page. This is from page 25. If our object is to try and improve the breed of man, should we not first of all decide on the kind of man most to be desired? To fix on all the qualities of the ideal man would probably do more harm than good, because to do so would be more likely to discourage than to encourage us in our efforts. Something must, however, be said on this subject. We can at all events assert that there are many kinds of men that we do not want. These include the criminal, the insane, the imbecile, the feeble in mind, the diseased at birth, the deformed, the deaf, the blind, etc. How to lessen their numbers in society will be considered in later chapters. It has been suggested that while getting rid of these extremely undesirable types, we should endeavor to create a group of supermen at the other end of the scale. If a few perfect individuals were to appear on Earth, and if their perfection were to be acknowledged by all, this would be very good. These supermen would rule over us to our great contentment. This idea is, however, utterly unpractical. The desire to dominate or lead other men is a very deeply seated quality. it would be very difficult and not altogether beneficial to get rid of it. This being the case, any group of supermen appearing in our midst would probably bully or harass their fellow citizens until the mob rose up and drove them from power or exterminated them. The creation of supermen is to be condemned because it would lead to either tyranny or rebellion. Neither should our aim be to create various inferior castes of human beings, such as would be especially adapted to do the dirty work of the world without complaint. So this is a very revealing section from this book, okay? In this particular chapter, Major Darwin is giving examples of the kind of men we want in society, as opposed to the kind of men that we don't want in society. The kinds of men that he's saying that they want are those that are genetically clear of any innate weaknesses or genetic weaknesses. People who are criminally inclined, in Leonard Darwin's mind, are genetically inferior. People who have trouble following the rules, okay, people who have difficulty abiding by the law, as it were. These people, well, and mind you, when we say abiding by the law, we're not talking petty crime here. We're talking felonious crimes. Like the kind of person who's a serial mobber or a serial mugger or a serial rapist or a serial murderer or someone who kidnaps people for ransom, or people who have a disposition to commit violent crimes or other heinous crimes. Okay, arson, burning people's house down, okay, heinous crimes like this. Now, anybody can steal a candy bar out of a grocery store and not be genetically defective. He's talking about felonious criminals, okay? He considers them to be genetically defective by nature, okay? And people who have other genetic defects like deafness or blindness, etc., etc., these people are considered by Major Darwin to be genetically defective. He's saying these are the kinds of people we do not want. So in order to reduce their numbers, we're going to have to start looking at state-sanctioned protocols so that the future of the race, the future of the breed, is as perfect as it can possibly be. You see. And he considers these to be extremely undesirables. And then he talks about the creation of supermen. Okay. And at this interval, I'll let you know, ladies and gentlemen, that this video will go over the 1 hour mark. So he's talking about the creation of supermen. Now, you can't create supermen any more than you can create undesirable men. Humans don't have the ability to create other people outside of the natural procreation mechanism that resembles reproduction. Okay, human intimacy, bringing children into the world through that mechanism. That's the only way that humans can create other humans. There's no machine or capsule or portal or other godlike or technologically marvelous gadget that could create humans to where humans can create other humans outside of the reproductive mechanism. Of course, there's cloning. Yeah, you can clone other humans. That technology exists. There are probably clones of me running around somewhere. But cloning people is not necessarily looked at with a positive lens by the global community. I mean, if you're cloning a person, okay, taking samples of their DNA or so and so forth, and using various scientific methods to create a human artificially, like in a laboratory or something. So let's say you do that. That person who was born or created by other humans has no parents. It's created artificially. And because it's created artificially, its life is in the hands of his mortal creators, who can hide him or her away in some tower somewhere or some office building and keep them away from other people, keep them away from civil society, and perform any manner of experiments on them in an attempt to scientifically engineer the perfect human. You see, what Mr. Darwin is talking about here is not cloning. That technology wasn't available when this book was written. What Mr. Darwin is talking about here is the ability to artificially engineer a race of supermen by using only the best and brightest men and the best and brightest women in matrimony, who will produce the best and brightest children. Major Darwin has a fantasy that he is laying out for the reader throughout this book. And that fantasy is that a race of super people can be engineered if the will is there and if the state resources facilitate that. And you'll see later on in this lecture where he gets more into how the state should contribute to the creation of these supermen, as opposed to genetically inferior people. People who have genetic deformities, or people who were born with genetic defects, or people who come from families who have genetic defects. How these persons and their lineage should stop at some point. Even if the state has to step in and sterilize that family, their lineage should stop in the interest of future persons who he sees as being very realistically able to be engineered by the state by eliminating the family lineages of defective people in favor of the lineages of people who have perfect qualities and traits. Now, ladies and gentlemen, gang stalking seeks to assist thinking like this. If we can put enough, and this is the architects of gang stalking talking here, if we can put enough of our best and brightest Americans on the side of the state as aggressors, okay, using our state-sanctioned signaling, disruption, and attack protocol against people that we see as less desirable, with the people who are more desirable in the United States using these mechanisms to disrupt the natural lives of less desirable people, to where the less desirable people will eventually die out for lack of resources and lack of opportunity, so that the better Americans can reproduce and create better Americans generation from generation, then let us do that. And let us stalkers decide who the superior Americans are, and we'll put them on the side of the state. We'll give them a few signals to work. We'll help them on the job. We'll help them in their personal lives. We'll help them financially. albeit behind the scenes, but we'll help them at the expense of less than desirable Americans. And you see, with gang stalking, less than desirable does not necessarily mean someone who's defective or deformed. Like, take me, for example. According to the architects of gang stalking, I'm a less desirable American who is someone who should not reproduce, because chances are my progeny will not assist the American trajectory through time and space, right? That's obvious to me. And give me 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. All right, now, how is me, your host, thrown into this undesirable category? Well, let's go down a checklist real quick. I'm not deformed. I have no physical defects. I'm 6'5". I'm north of 250 pounds, but that's normal for a person like myself who was an athlete throughout his youth and late teenage years. My face is symmetrical. My health record is clean. I suffer from no diseases, physical or mental. I don't have a criminal record. I'm not prone to heinous crimes. I've worked decent jobs considering my lack of a bachelor's degree and the constant workplace mobbing I experience. My progeny is healthy. They're in their late teens now. They don't have any health defects or physical deformities either. I'm taller than the average man. And given my background, my proven background as an athlete, I'm more physically capable than the average man. Furthermore, I've excelled in my studies post-high school, and I have more academic credits than the average American. Furthermore, my parents have proven their worth to society. My mother was an overachiever in high school and graduated with a double major in psychology and sociology from one of the best colleges in the country. My father, who didn't have the same opportunities as my mother growing up, still managed to drive an 18-wheeler truck through Tennessee for a company for 30 years and then retire. How many men in this country are capable of driving an 18-wheel truck for 30 years and retiring? So my parents are of good stock and they've proven it. I'm of good stock and I've proven it. I have a younger sibling that's done well for himself as well. So it would be difficult for any stalker to say, this man comes from bad stock, he's genetically inferior, so let's organize a mob of superior Americans to drive this person to an early demise because he is a detriment to society or not. What they might have done was taken a few scenarios or intervals or sequences from my teenage years, which saw their fair share of controversy, while in high school. And let's use that as justification to put him into the undesirable category. That's the only thing I could think of, ladies and gentlemen. But, as I've often said, stalkers and the architects thereof are the judge, jury, and executioner in a gang stalking campaign. And I'd also like to touch on something else that is written here. It says that these supermen that Darwin has this fantasy of engineering using state resources and mandates would rule over the inferior people, the people with less preferable genetic qualities. And he's saying that they have to be tactful, because if they bully or harass inferior people, the inferior people, who are likely to be larger in number, will rise up and exterminate the supermen. Okay? I think a very potent example of this prospect is seen in the Gospels of Jesus Christ in the Holy Bible. According to biblical narratives, Jesus Christ came to earth as a superman, a man with divine qualities that other people were not born with. He exercised these divine qualities in the form of miracles, such as walking on water, feeding 5,000 people with 2 fish and a few loaves of bread, raising people from the dead, healing the sick with just a touch, and simultaneously preaching the kingdom of God, which he said was his actual literal father, and how he himself would rise from the dead after 3 days after having been crucified, so that his mission of human redemption would be fulfilled, particularly with respect to those who believe on his name and accept him as the Messiah. What became of this Superman? Why didn't the people of the day revere him as such and build a kingdom around him? A man who could perform miracles and heal the sick, a man who was ever loving and forgiving, a man who spoke with the mouth of God Almighty himself, a man who was capable of bringing back your loved ones from a deceased state. Why did humanity not jump at the opportunity to worship this man and make this man their eternal king or emperor? Okay, this is what Darwin is saying. He's saying that supermen are not typically going to be accepted by people who are less super. So the people of the day who could not perform miracles, the people of the day who could not raise people from the dead, the people of the day who were not able to preach using God's own lips, the people of the day who were not able to perform physically impossible feats like walking across water and so forth, turning water into wine, preaching divine concepts and precepts that could lead you to a better afterlife. The Bible narrative shows us that the typical human still would not accept such a person out of fear or jealousy and may attempt to exterminate him. And that's exactly what happened. Christ was exterminated because the Romans didn't like him calling himself the Son of God. That was a title that was held by the Emperor of Rome and no one else. Furthermore, the Pharisees didn't too much appreciate Christ saying that he was the fulfillment and thus superior to the law of Moses. So despite his constant acts of divinity, or we'll call it superiority, there were still less superior people who sought his demise from being offended at his superiority. Major Darwin is saying just that in this particular paragraph. He's saying that supermen could be engineered, but there would always be the possibility that if they did not conduct themselves, that less superior people would attempt to exterminate him. All right, this is from page 37. This is about birth control, which Major Darwin believes is a necessary component of engineering the super race of people that he envisions for England. So what he's saying is we must weigh the good results against the bad. And I'll paraphrase here. He's saying basically that birth control is not something that should be advertised because people would utilize it to engage in sexually promiscuous behavior. If you know that there are medicines out there or birth control methods out there that will allow you to engage in intimate relationships without a resulting pregnancy, that people would take advantage of these birth control measures simply so that they could have these relationships recreationally and without any particular desire or capacity to bring children into the world and raise them to be super. What he's saying here is that certain moral advantages would, moreover, result from a general admission that birth control is justifiable in certain circumstances. Early marriages would be facilitated and promiscuous intercourse diminished in consequence. The feeling of individual responsibility in regard to their children amongst parents would be increased because the appearance of each child would be felt to be the result of deliberate choice. The strongest argument in favor of birth control is, however, that the present increase in the population of the world cannot go on indefinitely, and that the only alternatives in the future would be either birth control or the birth of millions of children destined to die a preventable death after a short and useless life. This is what is now taking place in countries where birth control is not practiced. To sum up, when the choice lies between doing an injury to posterity and refraining from parenthood, it appears that either continence or birth control must be practiced. Those who admit that continence cannot be relied on as a sufficiently efficient check on population, but who nevertheless hopes to see the practice of birth control entirely abandoned, should consider what would be the result of the fulfillment of their hopes. So what Major Darwin is saying here is that the inferior people who have genetic qualities or physical qualities or psychological qualities that are less than ideal, less than perfect, less than noble, should practice birth control out of patriotism. Let's use birth control so that my defective self and your defective self cannot bring defective children into this world. Because according to Darwin, these defective children are going to lead useless lives and are going to absorb social and political resources as opposed to contribute socially and politically to their respective societies. So what he's calling for here is voluntary self-sterilization in the form of birth control, so that only perfect people can reproduce in the interest of the future of the country that you live in. It brings me to a point that I've explored, but not expounded upon much in my lectures, but will do so now. There are lots of out-of-wedlock births that occur in the United States. Some demographics have more out-of-wedlock births than others. But typically speaking, when you look statistic for statistic, person for person, sequence for sequence, children who are born into the confines of a married couple or who are raised in a two-parent home typically fare better socially, academically, psychologically, physically, health-wise, personally, professionally, and with their own families than persons who are born outside of wedlock to parents who are not married and who are later raised either by one parent. So what he's saying is that the remedy to this is to simply restrict non-married people from giving birth. He doesn't say it outright in this particular passage, but it isn't difficult to see that what he's getting at are criminal penalties for people who give birth to children outside of the confines of marriage, typically. Okay, civil and criminal penalties imposed upon people who give birth to children outside of the confines of marriage because they are less likely to contribute to society, according to Darwin, and who are more likely to use resources that perfect people could be using. I don't have any doubt in my mind that here in the United States, there are babies, infants, who are marked as targets before they even reach the age of 5. If you take a child who is born to two parents who themselves are not terribly educated, who are not gainfully employed, and who are welfare recipients, and who live off of the state, statistically, that child is not going to contribute to society to the degree that a child born to a gainfully employed married couple will contribute to society. So it appears to me that there are already state-sanctioned mandates and protocols in place, including gang stalking, to keep those kinds of children, the ones born outside of wedlock, the parents who are not terribly considered to be contributors to society, in check. It's not a crime to have children out of the wedlock, but it is not difficult to see that there are U.S. politicians. I mean, particularly you saw this in the 90s where U.S. politicians were coming up with all these ideas for keeping people from having children out of wedlock. Okay, penalties with respect to how much they can receive in welfare, penalties for this, penalties for that. There were U.S. politicians that had this idea of incentivizing self-sterilization or voluntary sterilization for people who were welfare recipients. If you undergo sterilization procedures, you'll receive financial benefits or something to that effect. We saw this debate in the 90s quite a bit, and there were U.S. politicians that were on board with that. Self-sterilization. Keep yourself from bringing poorly parented children into this world. so that those poorly parented children don't become criminals and burdens to society. You see, gang stalking is one such program that is made to prevent people who are considered to be high risk from birth from getting in the way of human progress. You can keep them in check. Keep them in check with these mechanisms that are in place, with these hindrance mechanisms, these disruption mechanisms, these mobbing mechanisms. Make them afraid to go outside. Make them afraid to pursue an education. Make them afraid to go out and get a job for fear of being endlessly mobbed by superior members of society. And I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, after a few jobs, having experienced workplace mobbing, you will be hesitant to continue looking for work. I've experienced quite a bit of workplace mobbing myself, not only in colleges, universities, and in high school, but I've experienced it at church and at work. And once you experience it and you see how difficult it is to progress or succeed in any institutional setting, having experienced workplace mobbing, it will make you hesitant to try anything at all. Because you know that the second you step foot inside of that institution, you're going to be mobbed and disrupted to the point where you're either run out of the company or you quit. And what these stalkers are trying to put off is this. Yeah, we have an idea of who we think ought to be able to work. We have an idea of who we think ought to be able to earn an education. We have an idea of who we think ought to be able to earn academic credentials. We have an idea of who we think deserves to be able to raise children in the same trajectory as the parent. You see, I've oftentimes asserted, ladies and gentlemen, that gang stalking is a covert population control mechanism. It's obviously in its early stages. This program was never supposed to be found out. It was never supposed to be exposed. It was never supposed to be quantified the way I have quantified it. It was supposed to go on and continue on in strength until it was determined by stalkers and the architects of gang stalking who could bring offspring into this world. And if you're already a person who is existing in this world that is considered less than or inferior, that your opportunities will be artificially hindered and limited by the state so that superior persons to yourself can take full advantage of those opportunities. Okay. All right, this is from page 30. There are two ways of acting when the aim is the production of smaller families by persons of bad stock, and these are persuasion and compulsion. Persuasion is always to be preferred to compulsion. If the end desired can thus be obtained, let us therefore begin by considering what can be done by persuasion. So what he's saying is this: if we're going to get to a point where we are artificially producing super people of high stock, high genetic stock, we have to persuade people of lesser stock not only to accept that they're of lesser stock and show them why they're of lesser stock, but we also have to persuade these people of lesser stock not to produce human beings. Why? Because it's not in the interest of the furthering of the race. It's not in the interest of the furthering of the breed. You see. So what he's saying is that persuasion is preferable. Let's persuade these people to voluntarily self-sterilize or use birth control so that they're not bringing inferior people into this world. And compulsion is if you don't adhere to these doctrines of eugenical exercises, eugenics simply being the study of lineage and the production of the best lineage possible, then we will use compulsion and we can force you not to produce. And if you are a person who is inferior and you continue to bring inferior people into this world, we can use forced sterilization or we can use extermination to get rid of the inferior populations of this earth. This is from page 39. Sterilization is another means of preventing parenthood, which must be considered. It may in fact be regarded as a proper method of birth control in certain circumstances. In the discussion of sterilization, prejudices have often resulted from a misunderstanding as to the nature of the resulted operation which is to be proposed and should be performed. We shall here only be considering certain surgical methods which have been introduced comparatively recently for the ordinary stockyard way of sterilizing the male, which is never advocated for eugenic purposes. Moreover, there are some reasonable grounds for hoping that still better means of preventing parenthood will be available before long, these being perhaps dependent on the use of either X-rays or injections into the blood. The operation now generally adopted in the case of males, known as a vasectomy, is a trifling affair which can be performed under local anesthetics. The operation on females, a salpingectomy, is a more serious matter, perhaps being comparable in risk to that for appendicitis when there are no complications. The difficulty of operating on females affords no excuse, however, for not operating on males. In regards to both operations, the character and the life of the patient are in no way affected, except that parenthood does not result from the union of the sexes. Sterilization has been advocated both as a punishment and a safeguard to the public in regard to sexual offenses. The above-mentioned operation on the male would, however, be no safeguard against the assault. Moreover, the threat of performing these operations would have little deterrent effect on sexual offenders of each sex. So what he's talking about in this passage is sterilization being a necessary means of ensuring that only the best, or rather the genetically superior persons in any society should be able to reproduce in the interest of society, and that sterilization, namely through surgical means, should be considered. Now, he doesn't talk about necessarily forced sterilization here, although that is an underlying subtext throughout this book, as is the extermination, the outright extermination of inferior peoples in the interest of society. And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, in any society, any government can go through records that are kept on each citizen and manually assign superiority or inferiority to these citizens based on public and private records, as well as the public and private records of your parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. It's not difficult to go through people's health records, academic records, occupational records, public records, court records, marital records, divorce records, any kind of record that can be kept on a person, and decide who in society is superior genetically and who in society is inferior genetically. It's easy to find that out. And yes, governments across the world have the capacity to mobilize their militaries and their police forces to incarcerate and or exterminate persons who are deemed by the government to be inferior. That would be easy. We actually saw that once in human history, well, in America, or in recent human history, with Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. Hitler conducted forced sterilizations. Hitler conducted mass exterminations of people he thought were inferior to the Germanic race. That didn't turn out so good, because what he saw, what people on the outside saw, was simply xenophobic mass terrorism and mass murder. Hitler had a philosophy as to what he was doing. He had a doctrine as to what he was doing. He crafted political and social reasons as to what he was doing. Some of those political and social reasonings mirror what Major Darwin is talking about here, the betterment of the race, the betterment of the breed, a better future for Germany by using state resources to get rid of inferior people and using those same state resources to advance the trajectory through life of the superior people. You can't stop people from fighting back. You can't stop people from rising up and rebelling. You can't stop people from objecting to this line of thinking, to this line of questioning. And why? Because most people that are alive in the world today are imperfect. We see people that are quote unquote genetically superior physically. You see them in professional athletics. You see them in college athletics, and to a degree you see it in high school athletics. You see people who are quote unquote genetically superior in their physical appearance. You see that in models, you see it in movie stars. You see it in various actors, various industries in film and television and print magazine modeling, people who have very symmetrical features. Some of these people have heavy makeup on, it's true. And some of these people use performance-enhancing drugs like steroids to make their bodies appear or operate in a superior manner to other people. So who's to say these people are really, truly superior if they're using drugs and cosmetics to appear more beautiful or more athletic than they would be otherwise? Furthermore, if you look at technology and the advancement of computer sciences, the advancement of surveillance technology, the advancement of biotechnology and medicine and so forth, if you look at advancements in architecture, the advancements in military technology, advancements in vehicular technology, all right, advancements in space travel. One could look at the people that devise these advances in technology and say, well, certainly those people are superior psychologically. Certainly these people are superior mentally. Certainly these people are superior in various capacities to the average person. Maybe we ought to listen to them. Well, it's true that they could appear superior because of the amazing technological advances that they have helped pioneer. But their upbringing, the household that they were raised in, the educational opportunities that they were able to take advantage of, and the income of their parents, and the neighborhoods and the environments that they were grown up, that they were raised in, are probably far and away better than the average person. So they were able to have opportunities in education and in academic learning and so forth that other people were not able to take advantage of because of their socioeconomic situation or even their demographic status. So who's to say if the person that designs the next remote controlled car that is sent to Mars to gather data on the red planet, who's to say that that person would be able to come up with such an idea or an invention if he wasn't raised by the parents that he had, or was able to go to the schools he went to, or was able to live in the environment or the neighborhood that he lived in? Who's to say that if that person was raised in a housing project, that same exact person, who's to say they wouldn't have become a degenerate or illiterate career criminal? And vice versa. The child who's raised in the housing projects or in extreme poverty, who's to say if that child were not raised in a better environment, that he wouldn't be the one to come up with the next specialized space mission technology? You see? So environment plays a role in who appears superior and who does not appear superior. If you're raised by educated parents, chances are you yourself will be well educated. If your parents are not well educated, chances are you're not going to be terribly well educated yourself and may not contribute the way you would if your parents were well educated. And the same goes with poverty. If you were raised by parents who were wealthy, chances are that throughout your life you'll experience wealth. If you were raised by parents who lived in extreme poverty, chances are it would be very difficult for you to break that cycle. You see, so there are variables to this. It's difficult to just look at someone's accomplishments and say, hey, that person's superior. Look at what they've done. Look at what they've accomplished. Look at what they've managed to accomplish. Look at their inventions. Look at their creativity. Look at their work ethic. Look at their entrepreneurship. Look at their ability to work a job for 30 years and retire. Look at their ability to climb the corporate ladder. Look at their ability to captivate audiences and put together narratives and so forth. Okay? If a child has two parents that are classical music composers, maybe one of the parents is an expert piano player and the other parent is an expert violin player, they could teach their child to be an expert trombone player, and that child could experience lots of success in life. He may even compose a wonderful piece that becomes world famous, like Bach or Mozart or Vivaldi. But the opportunities that you have as a child plays into that. And there has to be a more detailed and a more potent way than just looking at someone's accomplishments on their face to determine who's superior and who's not superior. Standardized testing is one component of this. And children who are raised in middle class, upper middle class, or wealthy households tend to do better on SAT tests, ACT tests, college entrance exams, and they usually have higher GPAs in high school and college and usually graduate with better degrees and have better careers because of the opportunities they had as children that other children, those same opportunities were not available to them. You see, so there has to be an even and across the board determination of superiority outside of just who graduates high school, or just who gets a good job, or just who raises a nice family, or just who is a taxpayer or a homeowner or a car owner or someone with a 850 credit score, et cetera, et cetera. There has to be other judgments as to the person's superiority than just these things. Because these things alone can be afforded to people based upon their upbringing and their upbringing alone. Okay, there are some people in this country, as a matter of fact, who when they turn 18, they already have a high credit score because of the family or the neighborhood or the zip code that they were raised in, or the high school they were raised in, or the income of their parents. And then there are other children who start off life at 18 with a low credit score, a lower credit score that is assigned to them by these same criteria. The income of their parents, what zip code did they live in, etc., etc., etc. So, inequalities play into this narrative quite a bit, and it would be actually kind of fun and interesting to see if you did superiority tests across the board that were tailored for different demographics in different socioeconomic circumstances. We have covered that. That is sterilization. Let us progress on. All right, here is another one that I wish to elaborate on. This is page 51. The chapter is entitled The Habitual Criminal. The following is the way which criminals are separated out from the rest of communities. A lad who has had a very bad home or very bad natural qualities or both will go astray under almost all conditions. Another lad with a better home or with better qualities will commit his first breach of the law only if actually tempted. One second, please. If shown by a relative, for example, when hard up, how he can benefit himself a little risk by pilfering, it is the strength of all the harmful conditions added together which decides whether the trigger of crime will or will not be pulled. The criminal is a man of the same kind as his neighbors, differing from them only in degree or in luck. There are some persons who think that natural predispositions need not be considered, and that attention should be concentrated on the surroundings either of the child when at home or the man later in life. Those who look on the matter thus may believe that if all children who were taken away from bad homes, all the bad effects of the bad home might be wiped out. One of the consequences certain to result from the adoption of such a policy is, however, generally overlooked, and that is to say that it would result in more children issuing from bad homes. So what we're seeing here is a similar sequence of thinking from Major Darwin that I just asserted. He's basically saying that the home you're brought up in is going to play some role in the future that you have and your ability or your capacity to contribute to society, harm society, or just live a neutral life with no particular use at all. What he's saying here is that obviously there are variables to who can live a productive life and who can't. What he's saying here is that children who are raised in bad homes, but may be taken out of those bad homes, are going to be products of a variable or a set of circumstances than children who are raised in bad homes and never taken out of those bad homes at all. What he's saying is that the tendency to become a criminal is oftentimes rooted in the home you're raised in and the influences that you're exposed to in your particular environment or community. And what he's saying is, and a lot of what Major Darwin says in this book has underlying themes or subtexts. What he's getting at here is that in order to reduce the number of children that are raised in bad homes, which will equal a lower number of people who are criminally prone, you must stop people who live in less than desirable circumstances from mating. Of course, there are people who are raised in less than desirable circumstances that do well for themselves. That's what makes certain occupations in America so interesting. For example, take athletics. There are a lot of multi-millionaires here in the United States that were able to become pro athletes and contribute to society through their athletic talent as professional athletes, which are essentially entertainers who were raised in less than ideal circumstances. Some professional athletes, in various sports, particularly professional basketball, football, and boxing, were raised in squalor, extreme poverty, or horrible circumstances as a child, but their athletic talent were able to save them from a life of what Major Darwin would describe as uselessness. They were able to contribute to society through the use of their athletic talents. And they were able to become very, very wealthy in the process. These types of scenarios are interesting because it shows people who are atypical of the typical American success story becoming successful. And the same can be said for actors and musicians who become very wealthy and world famous for their talents. A lot of them grew up in less than ideal circumstances. Some of them grew up in abusive households. Some of them had reading disorders. Some of them had trouble finishing their high school diplomas. Some of them had trouble staying out of trouble. But they were able to find something they were good at, acting or music, or dance, or the arts, and make a success of themselves. Are those people inferior or superior? Some would say they're superior with respect to their physical abilities, but possibly inferior with respect to their reasoning or logic abilities. But ultimately, their superior qualities outweighed their inferior qualities to the point where they were able to become famous, do very well, make successes of themselves, and influence other generations of actors, entertainers, musicians, and athletes to do the same. And when it comes right down to it, that's what makes American success stories interesting. Seeing people who are not supposed to succeed. It's kind of like the underdog story. It's kind of like that Bible story, David and Goliath. David was not supposed to beat Goliath. Goliath had every advantage. He was 9 feet tall. He was exceptionally strong. He was a battle-hardened warrior. He was unbeatable in hand-to-hand combat. But David, this 30-year-old shepherd boy, was able to defeat this giant with a slingshot full of rocks. That's what makes these underdog stories so interesting. Who was superior, David or Goliath? Goliath was genetically superior, but David was superior in his will, his ability to survive, his ability to overcome the odds. He was superior in his faith and his ability to conquer the unconquerable. Some may look at my situation in a similar manner. Who's superior, my stalkers or Emmanuel Isaiah Smith? Some might say, well, your stalkers put together a very sophisticated state-run community mobilization mechanism that's taxpayer funded, it's nationwide, and it has the ability to artificially engineer the path of society. Some would say, well, your stalkers are superior because look at what they've managed to create. Look at what they've managed to undertake. They've managed to find a covert way of mobilizing each other to dominate a society of 311 million people. Others might say, well, Smith, you're superior. because you were able to figure out what they were doing despite having limited resources, and you were able to put together a project where you communicate what's happening, you talk about why it's unconstitutional, why it's a crime against humanity, and why it's an atrocity. And you're able to mobilize other people, not just in America, but around the world, to see why it's evil and speak out against it, which will lead to its eventual demise. You see? So, to gauge who's superior or inferior in a gang stalking campaign is a matter of what you consider to be inferiority and what you consider to be superiority. Of course, I'm the underdog, but I was able to conquer the unconquerable, just like David did, with a will to succeed, with an aggressive outlook, and with perpetual observation and reaction to what was going on around me. If you ask me who I think superior, I think I'm superior. My gang stalkers outnumber me 100 million to 1. And I was still able to see through what they did and attack it administratively and come out on top. All right, let's see. This is page 53. I'll read a portion of this page here, or the second paragraph. Those criminals who have the worst predispositions will do the most harm to society by having children. We should therefore ascertain as well that we can, with classes of criminals, have the worst natural qualities. The men who receive heavy punishments often commit crimes requiring at all events skill, intelligence, and courage. Habitual criminals who commit many trifling offenses against the law need only have courage enough to face a trivial punishment and the attendant disgrace. Okay, so this is an interesting passage because what he's saying is that certain types of criminals have certain superior traits. What he's saying is that people who receive horrible crime, who receive horrible punishments for committing certain crimes, have had to at some point be enterprising and mustered up enough courage to commit that heinous crime. Let's take an example. Okay? Let's take a bank heist, for example. Okay, we've all seen those movies where a daring bank heist takes place and a team of guys get together and they do the unthinkable and they rob a bank using strategy and aggression and walk out of that bank with millions of dollars. We've all seen them. All right, there was a movie that came out in the 1920s, if I'm not mistaken, called The Great Train Robbery. Which was actually one of the world-renowned director Martin Scorsese's inspirations to direct the movie Goodfellas. There was that movie that came out in 1995 called Heist. It was Heat. It was starring Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer, Winona Ryder. Lots of good actors in that movie. Where this team of guys put together the ultimate heist and were able to steal millions of dollars in treasury bills from a gigantic bank. There was that movie, The Dark Knight, which came out in 2012, starring Heath Ledger as the Joker, and a number of other really good actors in that movie as well. There was a daring heist in that movie in which the Joker organized a team of men to hijack a bank, okay? What Darwin is saying here is that in certain situations, like for example, you look at a heist, you look at the strategy, you look at the planning, you look at the personal courage, you look at the aggression, you look at the fearlessness, and the master of one's own energy and adrenaline that it takes to commit a crime such as that. You could easily say of the perpetrators, they have superior qualities to other people in being able to strategize and execute such a thing. But what he's saying is ultimately this: most criminals don't have those kinds of traits. Most criminals are just simply mentally depraved, derelict, or degenerate of mind to the point where they become career criminals committing heinous crimes for no reason other than just simply not being able to control their own cerebral faculties. And that criminals, typically, habitual criminals, can be reduced greatly in size and number by following the precepts of eugenics. The type of person who becomes a criminal, statistically, has a certain kind of upbringing by a certain kind of parent or parents in a certain kind of environment, and has certain traits that are typically inherited from one or more parents that facilitate a life of crime. And habitual criminals, those criminals that are constantly committing heinous crimes, are seen as Major Darwin as the least desirable in society because they have the ability and the capacity to create catastrophes for people in their lives. And that those are the types of people that ought to be looked at for removal from the human family as soon as possible. All right. Okay, this is page 55, also in the chapter Habitual Criminal. The result would be the birth of fewer children, long periods of detention must be enforced when nothing will be gained by making life uncomfortable. The result would be the birth of fewer children in criminal homes, something thus being done to stamp out crime in future generations. Various bad qualities associated with crime would thus also be somewhat lessened, including stupidity, sexual profligacy, bad temper, idleness, epilepsy, alcoholism, and bodily weakness and inefficiency. It is in the directions indicated by the second and third stages of this suggested method of dealing with habitual criminals that reform is the most needed. So what he's saying is that long periods of detention, or rather longer jail sentences for habitual criminals, is necessary to make sure that these habitual criminals do not go out and reproduce. What he's saying is that habitual criminals are genetically and psychologically defective, and to keep them from reproducing is to benefit society, so that these habitual criminals do not produce children or offspring that could pollute society with similar traits to their defective father or parents. So what he's saying is that longer jail sentences will keep these types of people from reproducing because they're outside of society, they're not meeting women, they're not mating with women, and they're not bringing children into this world. So to keep habitual criminals behind bars for longer periods of time ensures that they have restricted access to the reproductive mechanism, thus benefiting society. Let's see. All right, this is interesting. Okay, so this is going to be chapter 12, Who Pays the Bill? This is page 57. Okay, the unfit, meaning the genetically defective people, throw a heavy burden upon private institutions with respect to the cost of maintaining mental defectives, the insane, and the diseased at home or in private institutions being especially heavy. So what he's saying in this short paragraph is that unfit persons or persons who are mentally unwell by a matter of genetic disorders are a burden to society because they typically have to go in and out of mental hospitals for long periods of time. Their stays in the mental hospitals or insane asylums cost the hospital money that it would not have to shell out otherwise if so many mentally unstable persons were not staying there. And essentially people who are perpetually or constantly diseased, or people who are perpetually or constantly sick or ill as a matter of genetic inferiority, they pose a heavy burden to hospitals because they are constantly using hospital resources that more fit, more healthy, more socially productive people could be using, you see. So we're talking again about genetic defects and how those genetic defects can cost society money in various capacities. Well, not necessarily society, but the institutions like hospitals and so forth that society needs. What he's saying is that they're burdens. We're going to read again. This is going to be page 57, a little lower down. Unfortunately, citizens often fail to realize many of the following ways in which they are hit by taxation. Although the well-to-do can have no doubts on this subject, poor law expenditure is largely included in rates, and a rise in the rates causes a rise in the rents paid even by the poorest. Every man in effect pays taxes every time he drinks a glass of beer or a cup of tea or smokes a pipe. Taxation for unproductive purposes affects the commerce of the country in such a way so as to tend to cause a rise in the price of all goods. We have seen that a reduction in the numbers of the unfit and the inferior would result in a reduction in public expenditure. We now see that this again would lead to one of all the following advantages: a reduction in taxation and an increase in the public money available for expenditure in other directions on education, libraries, roads, public lighting, public safety, scientific research, for example, and a reduction in prices. If we were to confine our attention to taxation, we should, however, fail to realize much of the damage done to us by the unfit and the inferior. Employers, whether public or private, often can look only to the value of the work done by whole groups of employees, and consequently they may be bound to pay a lower wage to better workers if working in association with slackers or other inferiors. So this is an interesting sequence of paragraphs here. What he's saying here is that inferior people, unfit people, less productive people are directly and indirectly the cause of higher taxes on more fit and more superior people. What he's saying is that essentially the more people that live in any society, any community, any state, any country, the more people there are, okay, typically the more money needs to be printed, more credit needs to be issued, okay? There are higher numbers of defaults on various payments. There are higher numbers of welfare recipients, and thus the governments of these countries have to ask for more in the way of taxes from employed persons to shoulder the financial burden that unfit persons place upon public and private institutions. So for example, let's look at America, for example. We have a central bank. It is a bank of issue. All of the money we get from this central bank that is cash or printed money is printed in accordance with guidelines regarding budgets and so forth that are passed by Congress. Furthermore, all the banks in the country have their interest rates set by the Fed, and they get all their cash from the Fed, and any loan that any bank in the country needs with respect to being able to loan that money in return to people for mortgages and car notes and college tuitions and so forth. All of that comes from the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve System is the supreme bank of the United States, in which all banks are reliant upon, not only for their cash, but for the loans that these banks need from the Federal Reserve System to turn around and loan it to the population of the United States. What Darwin is asserting is this: the more people that live in the country, the more people are taking out loans. The more people that live in the country, there are going to be the more people that you're going to have paying back loans, but you're also going to have a higher number of people defaulting on loans. These mechanisms create a situation where the federal government, who itself borrows money from the Federal Reserve System for its expenditures, has to raise taxes on the general population in order to pay back the loans it takes out from the Federal Reserve Bank itself. So if there are less people in this society, in this country, the United States, there are less people taking out loans, there's less cash being issued, there are less expenditures being made, there are less citizens to accommodate with respect to welfare payments and other state welfare payments. And mind you, welfare payments and other expenditures that the U.S. federal government affords its impoverished citizens, they still have an allotment of money that they have to borrow from the Federal Reserve Bank to accommodate those people who are welfare recipients. So look at it like this: if there are less welfare recipients, then there are less loans that the federal government has to take out to accommodate those welfare recipients. If there are less welfare recipients, then there are less loans taken out by the U.S. federal government to accommodate them. So less welfare recipients equal by proxy lower taxes, because the U.S. federal establishment would have less of a need to take out the kind of money that it needs to take out to accommodate welfare recipients from the Federal Reserve System, and thus can issue lower taxes, lower tax mandates to its citizens, because there's a lower burden of welfare recipients who need state resources to live day to day. You see, less welfare recipients, less government programs equal lower taxes. You see, there's less of a tax burden on what Major Darwin would refer to as the fit population or the desirable population, because there would be less welfare recipients or people receiving government assistance. So less people receiving government assistance means lower payments from the federal government to welfare recipients. So by proxy, the government would be less inclined to take out these gigantic loans to accommodate these welfare recipients with state cash. Lower numbers of welfare recipients means lower disbursements of state cash. Lower disbursements of state cash means less or fewer loans from the Fed. Less or fewer loans from the Fed equal less taxes collected from the worker to make the payments on the interest on the money that the federal establishment has received from the Fed to accommodate welfare recipients and people using government cash. You see, it's economics, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it's something that you have to study. It's something that you have to look into. It's something that you have to take the time to fully grasp, you see. And the study of economics has changed my life. I mean, it'll change everything you think you know about business, about commerce, about society, about budgets, about politics, about budgets, about expenditures, about loans, about interest. I mean, it's all encompassed in the study of economics. And unfortunately, it's simply not something that you could just hear once or twice or read once or twice and grasp. Economics is a financial philosophy. It's a mathematical philosophy. It's a political philosophy that you have to study in depth in order to fully understand. So we'll move on to the next talking point here. All right, we're going to read from page 69. So when considering whether it is possible to make any move other than mere persuasion in the direction of the lessening of the fertility of the inferior, there are two classes of person whom it is especially desirable that attention should be directed. The first class comprises those who are living an uncivilized life in our midst. The second class includes all those who for a long time have been in receipt of help from various kinds from the state, that is, of public assistance, as it is called. So I'm going to stop there. So, what Darwin is saying in this paragraph is something that I'm going to tie directly into clandestine gang stalking, and that is inferiority being the proxy result of being someone who receives assistance from the state. What Major Darwin has to be implying in this passage is that if you're a person that's able to live the full trajectory of your life without assistance from the state in any form, then by proxy you are inferior or superior to a person who has to receive payments or any type of financial assistance from the state. And what he's saying is that it's almost like a proxy indicator of superiority and inferiority. Who can live off the US dollar because of the labor that they offer the market, and who has to live off a combination of the US dollar and financial assistance? And then there are those who can only live purely off financial assistance from the government because they have no labor skills to offer the market. You see? So what he's saying is that a proxy indicator of superiority and inferiority is who can live day to day, year to year, a lifetime, using the gains of their labor as opposed to those who have to make their living using financial assistance. Now, mind you, this is 1928. All right, this book was not written in 2025. Okay, we know that there are a lot of variables that go in to why a person might need financial assistance from the state. Sometimes a person has challenges or obstacles or other variables that would make it impossible for them to survive without assistance from the state. I don't think it's fair necessarily to call those people inferior Because quite frankly, a lot of those people were born into homes or households that may have required financial assistance from the state. You know, wealth is something that is passed down from generation to generation, but typically speaking, poverty is something that's also passed down from generation to generation. So if you're born into a wealthy household, you're going to have opportunities to make yourself what Darwin might refer to as superior, okay, academically, occupationally, with your family and so forth, your health and so forth. And a person who was born into an impoverished situation, who Darwin might refer to as inferior, because your parents, according to Darwin, were inferior genetically because of various traits, which makes you, by proxy, inferior genetically because of certain traits. You see? What he's saying is this: the wicked problem that's presented here is, period, point blank, there are two kinds of people in society. There are superior people and there are inferior people. He's laying out a blueprint of who can be called superior, and he's laying out a blueprint for who can be considered inferior. Now let's look at clandestine gangstalking for a second. Clandestine gangstalking has the capacity to force you into the inferior category. It doesn't matter what your GPA in high school was. It doesn't matter what your GPA in college was. It doesn't matter if you have a college degree or not. It doesn't matter if you're gainfully employed or not. It doesn't matter if you have a wife and kids, or maybe you just have kids, or maybe you just have a wife, or maybe you're single. It doesn't matter what your work ethic is. It doesn't matter what your level of talent is. It doesn't matter what your ability to apply yourself is. It doesn't matter what your personal talents or abilities are. If you get thrown into a clandestine gangstalking campaign, all that is getting disrupted. All that is getting diminished. All that is getting thrown under the bus. And all that is about to get rescinded, and the quality of your life is going to take a hit in ways that you never saw coming, and in ways that you never saw imaginable. Ultimately, clandestine gangstalking threatens to throw any target into the inferiority category, because under gangstalking's auspices, you're not going to be able to form interpersonal relationships. You're not going to be able to attain advanced college credentials. You're not going to be able to obtain a job. You're not going to be able to sustain a marriage. You're not going to be able to bring offspring into this world successfully. You're not going to be able to raise those children successfully. You might end up having to commit crimes in order to provide for yourself. And you may end up running into trouble with the law, not because you're genetically predisposed to it, but because the state has authorized, post 9/11, through its national security and intelligence apparatus, a thuggish, mob-like disruption mechanism in which undercover operatives, liaisons, and stalkers mobilize each other through a covert system of signals, symbols, verbal commands, vehicular maneuvers, and other symbols to threaten, harm, intimidate, disrupt, hinder, and undermine the quality of life in anyone, man, woman, or child, who is thrown into a targeted system. So you could be fully capable of contributing to society and living the ideal life. But gangstalking, through its disruption mechanisms, destroys every category of your life from the inside out, making your life a constant fight for survival. And since you're outnumbered, resource-wise, by your stalkers, chances are your stalkers will at some point get the upper hand. If and when they do get the upper hand, the quality of your life will degenerate so badly that you will find yourself in the inferior category despite having a superior mindset, you see. And that's what gangstalking does. It takes superior people, or people who might be superior, or people who want to be superior, or people who have superior traits and qualities, and subjects them to so much damage, harm, and disruption that the degradation of that targeted person's life lands them in the inferior category. Next thing you know, they're going to have to live off the state. They're going to have to do welfare payments. They're going to live in the lower tax bracket. They're not going to be able to afford the finer things in life. They're not going to be able to raise progeny. They're not going to be able to educate themselves. And they're not going to be able to do any of the things that they would be able to do if the gang stalking campaign against them were not present. You see, gang stalking artificially forces people into the inferior category so that they can be further prosecuted by the state for inferiority. All right, moving along. All right, in page 77 in the chapter Bigger Families and Good Stocks, to paraphrase, it's saying that a patriotic family who is of good stock, they're healthy physically, they're healthy psychologically, they're healthy financially, they come from good families, the trajectory of their life is on the up and up, they have a bright future. What they're saying is that if you're a true patriot and you come from good stock, you should have 4 children. That's going to bring 4 contributing members of society into the world. And this is in contrast to what Darwin said earlier in the book, where on the flip side of that, if you're an inferior person, patriotism for you is having no children. So what Darwin is calling for here is self-knowledge. Know if you're superior and know if you're inferior. If you can gauge using a set system of criteria that you are superior, be patriotic and bring more superior people into this world. But if you're inferior, know you're inferior and restrict the number of inferior people that you bring into the world so that society can be a better place without your offspring. All right. Here's an interesting one. This is chapter 16, Financial Aids to Parenthood. This is page 79. We have seen that the inefficient and poor often have large families. We have also seen that the well-to-do who ought to have several children generally have very few. Why not make the rich poorer, and then it would seem that they would also have large families? This is a desirable result and is not, however, as we shall see, to be obtained in this manner. Let us first consider why poor families have large families. For this fact, there are several explanations. The man who depends upon the use of his muscles to earn his daily bread can do his best work when young. His wages soon cease to rise, and he can marry with no more imprudence when young than with older. The younger the age at marriage, the larger the family will be as a rule. Hence, day laborers will comparatively have large families. It would, of course, be a folly to make men with good natural abilities rely on their muscles rather than on their brains. The explanation would be why the poor have large families and points to no way of increasing the size of the families which are such an increase to be desired. Another reason for the big families of the poor is that their children go to work at an early age and soon begin to help fill the family pot. Such children are regarded as a help and not a hindrance, and parents are thus encouraged to have many. But children who go to work when young must leave off schooling at an early age. We want fewer children to be handicapped and not more. If all children in all classes were made to suffer this disadvantage, our high civilization would disappear. Lastly, many couples have big families because they are naturally careless and take little thought for the future. And the thoughtlessness of these couples often makes them poor. We cannot wish anyone to be improvident. We must not hope for the appearance of larger families in consequence of parents becoming more careless. So what Major Darwin is asserting in this page is that poor people have large families because the poverty that this family is experiencing could be lessened if the children of this large family go to work at an early age, thus generating more of an income for the family typically. So what he's saying is that there are families that are poor that produce large numbers of children as a technology, as a financial technology, so that they can send the child to work and bring in more of an income for the family. He's kind of vague in this particular page as to what his view is of that with respect to the grand scheme of things. Does he agree with this practice or not agree with this practice? He seems to have he seems to scoff at it, if you really want to know the truth. I don't think Major Darwin likes this idea of really poor families having lots of children so as to bring more income to the family through the labor of the child. Okay? I think that his disposition towards this is, well, these children that you're bringing into the family, yeah, they're going to help you bring in more income, but these children are going to grow up poor themselves, and then they're going to have really big families so that their children can bring more income into the family. And then their grandchildren are going to be poor, and then their grandchildren are going to have big families, and the cycle is going to go on and on and on and on and on. And you're going to have all of these poor people creating all of these gigantic families, so all of these children can bring all of this new income into the place, and you're going to have a society full of inefficient people who are inferior genetically. You see. So he's also saying that having big families for no particular reason is careless and selfish and useless. And he appears to have a personal philosophy of let's increase the quality of the population, not the quantity of the population. You see, and he has these methods and ideas for how to increase the quality of the population as opposed to the quantity, because ultimately, the more people that are in any given society, the higher the crime rate, the higher the crime rate's gonna be, the higher the taxes are gonna be, the higher the unemployment rate's gonna be, the higher level of dissatisfaction with your quality of life is going to be. And there's going to be an increase in there's going to be a decrease, rather, in the ability for people to achieve their personal goals and dreams, because there are going to be less opportunities for the large number of less economic opportunities and less employment opportunities for the increasingly large number of people that are in any given society. All right, moving on. Okay, this is a good one. This is page 84, chapter 17, Selection in Marriage. Those who marry anyone with any serious defect of body, mind, or character are apt to bring trouble on both themselves and their children. This is because such failings are not only immediately harmful, but may be passed on to succeeding generations by natural inheritance or by example. To be careful in the choice made in marriage will therefore benefit the nation and the race. I'm going to skip down a little bit. Let it be supposed that I have 4 dogs, 2 well-bred dogs and 2 ill-bred dogs. And he's talking about dogs, the animal, the actual domesticated animal. Of course, I wish to mate together the 2 well-bred animals so that I will get puppies as well-bred as possible. But how about the ill-bred dogs? If I take care that they do not breed, nothing more need to be said. But if I were to let them mate together, and if they were to have 4 puppies while my well-bred couple only had 2, then my group of puppies would contain twice as many ill-bred dogs as well-bred dogs. So, this is an illustration here, okay, of Darwin's, really the totality. I mean, this is a summation of what Major Darwin's ideas of eugenics, or the bringing forth of preferable people into this world, is. He thinks that people of superior genetic stock should have more children, and people who have inferior stock should have less children. And he's using the example of dogs here because it is an example that is easily identified and easy to comprehend. Okay, if you have 2 dogs, 1 male and 1 female, and these dogs are well-bred dogs, okay, purebred dogs, healthy dogs, strong dogs, smart dogs, and you want a nice brood of puppies, then you're going to want those well-bred dogs, the male and the female, to mate. And you're going to want to see them mate often. However, if you have ill-bred dogs, also, you're going to want to see them mate less. Why? Why do you want the purebred dogs, the well-bred dogs, to mate more and the ill-bred dogs to mate less? Well, because the purebred dogs, they'll probably be better companions, they'll probably be better trained, they'll probably be more effective and efficient in any assignment you give them. For example, if they're work dogs of some kind. And you'll also see an overall increase in the atmosphere of the home. However, if you look at the ill-bred dogs, for example, why don't you want ill-bred dogs? You don't want the ill-bred dogs because they are going to do nothing really but increase your financial burden. Ill-bred dogs are going to increase the amount of money you have to spend weekly on dog food, on grooming materials, and it's going to produce twice as much waste around the establishment that you have to pick up. There's no guarantee that even after any amount of investment into the health of these ill-bred dogs, that they'll be of any help to you, particularly if they develop some sort of a genetic disorder or disease that causes you to have to pay for hospital visits or veterinary visits for the ill-bred dogs. So ultimately, from a financial perspective, keeping the ill-bred dogs and letting them breed is going to be a financial liability, as opposed to the well-bred dogs, which could be an asset, particularly if you put those well-bred dogs to work. You see, it's a similar philosophy to what he was saying about well-bred humans and ill-bred humans. The well-bred humans of superior genetic stock are going to contribute to the economy in the way of taxes and their status as law-abiding citizens. And the ill-bred people are going to cost the state money through welfare payments, hospital stays, and incarceration, thus causing a general rise in prices and a general rise in taxes, because the state is the one that must produce the prisons and the hospitals and the welfare checks that the inferior people have to become indexed to, you see. So we're going to move on to pages 85 and 86. We must not blind ourselves to the fact that it is impossible to force high ideals into low minds. A person who is markedly inferior in mind will generally prefer to marry another person of like inferiority. Among such as these, we can do little towards preventing parenthood, either by example or precept. Definitive steps, such as those described in chapter 14 with respect to birth control and sterilization methods, ought to be taken to reduce the size of the families of those of inferior stock. If this is not done, merely to preach care and marriage will do little towards saving the race. So what he's saying is this: to be superior is to be superior indeed. To be inferior is to be inferior indeed. At some point in a person's life, they are going to exhibit superior qualities, physically or psychologically, or inferior qualities, physically or psychologically. What he's saying is this: if you are superior, essentially any high ideal that you obtain will be used for the progress of yourself and your family and society. However, these same high ideals cannot be and should not be taught or told to people of inferior stock. Because if you take high ideals or noble ideals or superior ideals and you attempt to feed these ideals to a person of inferior stock, they're simply not going to be able to apply these ideals to their life or become better, because they are indeed inferior to the superior person. You see, it kind of reminds me of that Bible verse in the New Testament. If I'm not mistaken, it's in the book of Matthew during the ministry of Jesus Christ, where he says, "It is not meet, or it is not necessary to throw pearls to swine. The swine will trample the pearls and tear you limb from limb." All right. And there was another similar verse where Christ said, "Do not take what belongs to the elect and feed it to dogs." Okay. It's a similar concept to what Darwin is asserting here. Okay. High concepts, high ideals, noble concepts, noble ideals, superior concepts, superior ideals should be kept among superior people. Don't waste your time taking superior concepts and trying to feed them to inferior people. The inferior person will probably take these concepts, pervert them, and harm you in the process simply for being better at something than them. And that this idea of taking high concepts and only affording them to superior people is the key to saving the race and ensuring that only superior people are brought into this world, everyone doing their part patriotically to ensure that that happens. All right, we're going to talk about this. This is we're going back some. This is going to be page 31. Some forms of insanity are said to be hereditary and others not to be so. Though this is hardly a logical distinction, it is true that insanity is sometimes the direct result of a contagious disease. In such cases, the descendants of the insane and the diseased man will not be more likely to become insane in consequence of their ancestors' disease, and his insanity may therefore be said not to be hereditary. If a person becomes insane, it is more often, however, because he has a certain predisposition to his disease. This predisposition may be strong or weak. If it is very weak, instantly, insanity may be avoided, or what is called cured, by leading a careful life. So this is interesting because it says that some forms of insanity are hereditary, meaning you inherit certain brain problems from your parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents, etc. And he's saying that some forms of insanity or mental illness, rather, severe mental illness, are developed over time. Okay, so this is part of what gang stalking aims to do. Okay, this state-sanctioned disaster protocol, this is part of what it aims to do. It's not only aimed at degrading the quality of your life, financially, occupationally, academically, or physically. It's designed to make you hate your country, hate your God, hate your fellow man, and eventually develop mental problems. That's part of what this program is designed to do, is degrade the target's mental capacity. Or their ability to obtain mental health. And the reason that it's set up in this particular way is because ultimately a person who is driven into insanity by a state-sanctioned attack mechanism can be artificially placed in the inferior category, you see. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, that gang stalking artificially sort of forces people into the inferior category. It can do this through workplace mobbing and the destruction of your financial situation. It can do it through the attack mechanism, constantly making you sick. Because remember, inferiority in Darwin's mind is bad physical health too. But it also can throw you into inferiority by degrading the quality of your mental health as well. So gang stalking in various capacities, it attacks you occupationally, it attacks you physically, and it attacks you mentally. It attacks you occupationally through workplace mobbing. It attacks you physically by organized disease contamination, and it contaminates you mentally by causing stressors that could cause you to become mentally ill if you're not careful. So that is gang stalking's core strategy, is to degrade every aspect of your life and cause you to become inferior so as to increase the need to monitor or surveil you. You see, it's state-sanctioned cataclysms. You constantly have stalkers, undercover operatives, and liaisons who act on the power and authority of the state to go around disrupting, harming, and attacking American citizens in unison, so as to create catastrophe after catastrophe and cataclysm after cataclysm for that citizen. That is the goal. And they're doing it on behalf of a targeted person's enemies, which makes it atrocious, violent, and a crime against humanity. Okay, moving along. All right, this is one that's interesting. It's about jobs and wages. This is page 66. The title of this chapter is "The Deterioration of Our Breed." So he's talking about good qualities: honesty, industry, perseverance, sobriety, intelligence, good fellowship, strength, and good health. Looking to the mass of mankind, the man who wins his way into a better position generally possesses a considerable balance of good qualities. Good jobs are, it is true, often obtained by favoritism. Much good work is ill paid, and men often fail from want of training or opportunity. These are all evils against which we must fight, and they are evils which will diminish with any real advance in civilization. A continuous deterioration in the inborn qualities of people would, however, be certain in time to show itself in a decline to our civilization, and thus put an end to such hopes. Here again it may be asked, if the differential birth rate is really producing such harmful effects, then why are they not clearly visible? The reason is that the causes of harm now being done have been at work for only a comparatively short time, and that the changes for the worse are being produced only very slowly. A century ago, there was very less movement up and down between the social classes, the barriers between them being much harder to surmount. In recent years, great efforts have been made by the award of scholarships and in other ways to pick out the best, even in the poorest districts, so as to help them win high wages. So what he's saying is that upward mobility in society can be facilitated through awards that are granted to people who exhibit stellar or above average skills in something. It could be academics, it could be music, it could be military prowess, it could be politics. I mean, they're here in the late 20s we're talking. There are a number of ways that you can go from one tax bracket to another or one social status to another based on your skills and abilities, and that being born poor or without much status does not have to determine the trajectory of your life. All right, moving on. All right, we'll read from chapter 14, Eugenics in the Future. This is the first paragraph. All of us are being greatly damaged by the presence of the unfit and the inferior in the ranks of the nation. If those included in these classes have large families, the injury to our country will be slowly increased as generations succeed each other. And in all probability from this cause, racial deterioration is now actually taking place very slowly but very steadily. All we have seen, and the question is, what can be done to safeguard the nation against this treacherous disease? So essentially what he's saying is something that's reiterated throughout this book, and that's that inferior persons should have smaller families or no families. Because it's going to essentially lead to the deterioration of the quality of the race of people that live in that particular country. Moving on. All right, we're going to read page 71, Eugenics in the Future. And we're going to close it here, and I will give you my final thoughts on the matter. This is the second paragraph from the top of the page. Another general question which has to be considered is whether any couple has the right in any circumstance to bring offspring into the world. Here we have to first ask, what is the meaning of the word right? If a man says that he has the right to live to the age of 80, such a statement is meaningless, because all men cannot be made to live to that age. If a man says he has the right to vote at a certain election, he means that the government ought to see to it that he can record his vote on that occasion. The right of one person always implies an obligation on some other person or persons, and it is only by considering the obligation side of these questions that light can be thrown on them. As an unlimited right to parenthood, this would imply an obligation on the part of the state to see to it that all couples could always produce as many children as they liked, but the state does not do this on a case of persons confined in prisons or other institutions. And surely the state ought not to facilitate the appearance of such offspring as would likely to produce an injurious effect on all future generations. The right to parenthood cannot be unlimited. So what he's saying here is that, quite frankly put, the right to parenthood should be granted by the state to people who possess superior genetic qualities, period. What he's saying is that the furtherance of the superior persons of any race is a responsibility of the state to ensure. That the state has a responsibility to ensure the progression of genetically superior people and the regression and eventual extermination of people of inferior stock, which will ensure that future generations will have maximized potential, maximized capabilities, and facilitate a maximized efficiency for a people, for a government, for a nation. The founding fathers of the United States of America would likely disagree with much, if not all, of what Major Darwin has suggested. Creating a society of superior people by maximizing the births of superior people and minimizing, or rather bringing to zero, the births of inferior people is a radical concept. Okay? Because the only way you could bring about such a result is if you use the power of the state to mandate who can and who cannot have offspring, which is typically seen as an inalienable right that every person makes for themselves. My thinking is this: if there's any government on this earth that believes that there should be diminished rights with respect to who can produce offspring and who can't, based on genetic features, then it had better be made clear what constitutes a superior person and what constitutes an inferior person. And quite frankly, in 2025, with a worldwide population of 7.1 billion people, it's difficult to assert who deserves to be here on this earth and who doesn't, who deserves or who is fit to be a parent and who isn't. If you look at gangstalking, for example, it can facilitate through street theater, synchronized activity, and other factors who can be a good parent and who can't. If you are a parent and there are clandestine forces working in your favor, in your community, in your workplace, etc., in your home, you can appear to be a better parent than a targeted individual who has similar clandestine forces that are working to destroy his academic attainment, his occupation, his interpersonal relationships, and his very life. The state has no right, ultimately, to decide who has the right to live and who doesn't. Aside from capital punishment and the death penalty, sure, there can be incentives granted to people who fulfill their roles and duties as productive citizens or people who contribute to society, pay their taxes, etc., etc. Surely incentives will encourage people to live such lives. But on the flip side of that, how dare any state actor introduce into a person's life circumstances or scenarios that are hostile to that person's personal development in their trajectory through this world. If a state has the wherewithal to implement policies, national security or not, to ensure that certain people in society appear inferior and certain people in society appear inferior, then that state does not have a right to exist, neither does that government. There are inalienable rights that all persons in this world are blessed with that are given to him by God or nature. If he uses these inalienable rights to his advantage in such a way to as create prosperity for himself and his offspring, then that is a positive thing. However, if a person does not utilize every faculty that they have to bring prosperity to the society that they live in, and the capacity to pass these views, these attitudes down to their progeny so their progeny can be successful, then that is a bad thing, you see? But the state does not have the right to impede upon these matters. The state's contract with a citizen is simple. You will use taxpayer money to provide resources that will help your citizenry attain life, liberty, and happiness. If the state is introducing into people's lives circumstances or sequences that hinder life, liberty, and happiness, then that state is illegitimate. The state is the one that's inferior, not the citizen. Gangstalking has caused the United States sociological mechanism to become inferior. And it's going to take superior citizens to see and understand this phenomena and reverse the trend. Thank you for tuning in.